I'm thrilled today to have with me Tim Kelley, all the way from California. He's here to speak with Conscious Capitalism, and I got a couple minutes with him. Tim is the founder of the True Purpose Institute and the author of True Purpose. Thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here.
So, Tim, question I bet you never get, what is your purpose?
Gee, I don't know, let me think. I would say that I'm trying to create heaven on earth, might be one way of putting it. A more easily graspable way that doesn't accidentally get into religious territory would be to create the new paradigm. So if you imagine that human society is a form of software that runs on people, then I'm trying to do a software upgrade.
Is that, in our pursuit of purpose or why, we came to the conclusion that it should be simple, genuine, and aspirational. It's that 3 to 5 word, pithy why, and there's certainly a practical advantage because that's easier for people to remember in an organization. I've also learned that the methods we were using were indirect, predominantly. So could you explain a little bit of that from the context of where we are in that kind of why versus what might a more elaborate process look like?
I like the idea of the 3 to 5 words, the simple, direct. What was the third one you said?
Simple, genuine, and aspirational.
Simple, genuine, and aspirational. Thank you. Let me say that the aspirational, I would go further and say also inspirational, in that a good purpose has to generate emotion, that it has to produce a reaction in people. And if it's an individual purpose, it's my purpose, it has to produce inspiration and a reaction in me. I have to be inspired to do something about it. Otherwise, why have one? If it's an organizational purpose, it would need to be inspiring, ideally, to both employees, leaders, also customers, right? That it would cause them to do things they might not otherwise do if they didn't know that purpose and weren't trying to act on that purpose. So that direct, indirect thing goes to methodology, which is how do we go about finding a purpose that is aspirational and inspirational and simple and easily memorable. And the typical methods are trying to reverse engineer or figure out what the purpose might be based on some form of evidence. So for example, for an individual we might ask, well, when do you feel most passionate and alive? When are the times when you're doing something and you forget about time and it just seems effortless? Well, likely when the person is doing those things, they're doing their purpose. And so we can use the answers to that question to sort of back up and say, okay, well, if all of these things feel that way to you, what's the pattern here? And from that, we can usually get a very short, simple purpose statement that meets the standard that you set. I don't necessarily think the shorter the purpose, the better. I would say the more inspiring, the more powerful the purpose, the better. And sometimes that takes a few more words, and sometimes that takes a few less. In general, I would agree with you that the most powerful ones tend to be relatively short. Mm-hmm. The idea of a directly derived purpose is where, rather than trying to figure out what the purpose is, we ask something to tell us what the purpose is. And the idea here is that we're assuming that the purpose already exists and that something already knows what it is, and now we have that thing explain the purpose to us. So we don't actually have to do there's no creativity involved, no computation involved, no review of history involved. There's no effort or energy spent trying to figure out what the purpose is. It's simply an interview. What is my purpose? And then something tells you. And the trick there, the gotcha, is what is it that already knows your purpose? Or in the case of an organization, what is it that already knows the organization's purpose? And that gets into an issue of belief systems. What do you believe might know your purpose and could tell it to you?
Whether they know it or not, they have had some purpose. Mm-hmm. And I imagine, is that true in your work as well, where you realize there's a very successful organization that maybe just never knew how to articulate it? And is there value to figuring that out?
There are organizations that are actively trying to identify and clarify their purpose and making an effort and hiring people and trying to do stuff to get that to be clear. There are other organizations that have no clue about it and aren't even looking. And I know you've found the same things with your research. The ones that really interest me are the ones who either don't know what their purpose is and are trying to find it, or the ones who have found a purpose and aren't satisfied with the purpose they found. And what I see a lot of these days in particular, as organizations like Conscious Capitalism do a good job of promoting the concept of purpose as an essential piece of a healthy, successful organization, even if that organization is a for-profit company or a manufacturing company or whatever, is that there are companies that have a felt sense of purpose. Like, it feels purposeful around here, right? When we come to work and we get together and we talk about stuff and we innovate, there's this quality, this sense of purpose. We know we have a purpose because we're actually having a relationship with it without words. And what we're really trying to do is capture that in language so that we can explain it to people, so we can explain it to prospective employees, so we can explain it to our clients and customers and say, this is our purpose, this is what we're really about. As opposed to saying, well, come here and feel this and sense it, and then you'll know what we're talking about, because that takes time, right? That's not as efficient. And so those are the ones I most like to work with, where they're like, well, we know we're a purposeful company, we can feel it. But every time we try to say it, the words that we come up with don't do justice to the thing that we know that we are.
One of the things I noticed using the what, how, why framework, that's pretty common, is in that idea of, as you said, well, we have a purpose, but we're constantly, maybe always trying to figure out if there's a deeper purpose. One of the observations I have is that if you line a few of those up, a few of those increments up, the last one starts to feel like the how.
Yes.
And then as you go deeper, it's like, no, this is the why. A few months later, no, that's the how.
That was the how. This is the why.
And then I'm reminded of something you said about the half-life. So you recommend once a year, is that right? At least to check in and to make sure that that's still resonating.
After a couple of years, the power of that purpose will fade. And we're really talking about the power to inspire and motivate. And so the way you know that is you say the purpose out loud and you're not moved by it. Now, most organizations' mission statements don't move anybody. You can read it off the website and it's sort of like, bleh. It's kind of like as inspiring as saying, this is a table, or today is Tuesday, you know.
Written by a committee.
Exactly, and it's true, but totally uninspiring. So if the company finds a purpose that's inspiring and people get excited about it, what they'll find is 5 years later, they're like, but wait a minute, that used to really inspire us, why are we not as juiced about it anymore? And it's just as you said, what we experience from working with hundreds of companies is that it has a half-life, right? That the power of it over time sort of tails off and goes down, and you have to refresh and renew it. Now, I wouldn't say that the purpose fundamentally changes every year. I definitely would not say that that's true. I would say that it's worth checking the wording of the purpose every year to see if that wording is sufficiently powerful to capture the juice and the energy of the purpose. Now, what usually happens is after a year or two, the company goes back and tests it, and they'll find out, in my system, they wind up with 4 purpose statements, not 1. They'll test the 4 purpose statements, and maybe 2 of them are still powerful and 2 of them are not. So now they go through a brief process of seeing how to update the wording of the ones that are not powerful to get that juice back, right? And then announce it to everybody, and now we're off and running with that. Now, it's rare, it's actually very unusual for the purpose to change in a truly fundamental way, but it does happen. If the organization goes through a real profound process of self-reinvention, it can result in a different purpose existing after that transformation.
Well, you mentioned motivation, and that's certainly a big part of this. Could you talk a little bit about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation in an organization?
Absolutely. So that if I'm your boss, I'm monitoring your behavior and tailoring the reward system to get the maximum performance out of you. So I praise you in public, I give you bonuses, I give you promotions, corner offices, company cards, whatever, stuff, things that I believe you desire, and that I'm holding this carrot out to get you to do the things that I want you to do, right? If you do this, then you get this prize. And the belief is that that motivates people and gets them moving. Well, we know from the research on employee engagement that variable compensation and all these other bells and whistles actually don't really move the needle. And if they do move the needle, they move it down. So the prevailing belief is that you can buy performance, you can buy engagement. I love the title of the book written by another purpose guy, which is "Can't Buy Me Like." Right? You can't bribe people to like you, right? So you can't bribe employees to like the company. You can't bribe customers to like the company.
You can bribe them to pretend to like you.
You can bribe them to pretend to like you, and you can get them to do short-term, simple changes in behavior with extrinsic rewards. And this is where the whole confusion comes from, is that all this research that resulted in the extrinsic rewards was done during the Industrial Revolution, when you were getting people to screw more caps on toothpaste tubes per hour. And for that, extrinsic rewards work. But for a person in a complex modern organization doing activities that require design, problem-solving, relationship skills, initiative, stuff like that, doesn't work at all to train better. So really the thing that motivates people effectively over the long term is when they motivate themselves. That is, that they are seeking something and they perceive this role, this job, this position, this company as a strategy for getting something that they decided they wanted, not something you decided to offer them, to manipulate them in the way that you want them to behave. And this is very difficult for business leaders because these intrinsic rewards, these rewards I give myself, you can't control. And as a business leader, the imagination is that your job is to control me and my behavior.
Or at least control the organizational structure.
Something.
Yeah.
So in a modern, what I would call a new paradigm company, right, a more forward-looking form of leadership would be to create an environment in which people are self-motivating because of the environment and because of who they are, as opposed to trying to figure out exactly how to tweak the reward system to get them to behave the way that I want. And purpose is not the only strategy for doing this, but it's a very effective one, and it's becoming more and more popular. Which is, if I come to work and I'm not only doing tasks and getting a paycheck, but also contributing to an organization that's actively making the world a better place in some way, it's sort of like donating to a nonprofit, right? Or volunteering for a church or something like that when I come to my 9-to-5 job. And so I feel inspired and motivated that the work that I do every day is making the world a better place. So the bonus is a bonus of meaning that I give myself, not a bonus of money or praise or a trip or something like that that you give me.
So even the idea of somebody else telling you what the meaning is not the same as me deciding that that's what the meaning is.
Well, yes and no. So to some extent, as the leader of a purposeful organization, I'm forced to choose and define some form of meaning for the organization. Right? So what that would look like is engaging in a process of discovering the most powerful, most motivating purpose that company could have. Now, as a leader, that's probably not my expertise, and I'm probably going to need help to do that. But assuming that I either knew how or got the proper help, and now I have this really inspiring organizational purpose, well, it's not going to be inspiring to everybody. So now I have to look for the individuals in my hiring process who are inspired by this purpose, right? It aligns with their own sense of purpose and their own values and their own view of how they want to change the world. They're the ones who are going to gravitate me. They're the ones who are going to put in the extra effort and the extra time and work harder and be more devoted to the organization because they're in love with our purpose, right? And then there'll be other people for whom it's just a job. They're not going to be my top performers in a purposeful company or any company.
Unless there's another one that matches their...
That's right. Now they might go somewhere else and do it there. Now what I can't do is I can't tell the individuals how and why they should derive meaning from our collective purpose. That's something they have to figure out for themselves. I can encourage them to figure it out. I can ask them. I can say, what does this have to do with your purpose? Right? This will get them to think about it. This is a good thing. Now I'm encouraging them and creating an environment in which they can create meaning for themselves. But I can't say, you should be inspired by this purpose because of X, Y, and Z. Right? That's not going to work. So I can define the meaning in the sense of creating a process that creates the overall purpose, but I cannot plug that into every individual proactively. Again, I'm creating an environment in which they motivate themselves rather than me doing something to them to motivate them.
So we've talked about individuals, we've talked about organizations and businesses, but you are working with governments now.
Yes.
You've been working with Israel. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? And how is that different from business specifically?
So we've been working for about 3 years on country level purposes. Actually, maybe even a little more. We've been working for 3 or 4 years on Colombia's purpose, a South American country, and then for about a year, a little less than a year, on Israel's purpose. And we're using the exact same process that we use with organizations. It's a collective purpose process to find the purpose of the country. And as we expected, different groups of people who are from vastly different parts of Israeli society will, brought to a room and going through the true purpose process, it will yield very similar results no matter who goes through it. And so we've had now 7 different groups of between 20 and 50 people, and the purposes they all come up with are very similar and very consistent. And this tells us that we are getting at an actual national purpose, right? And it's very different from the Colombian stuff. This tells us that we're actually getting at a national purpose rather than just getting the opinions of whoever happens to be in the room that day, right? The consistency tells us that it's working. So the next step for us when we get some more funding is to phase it up through websites and apps to be able to include many thousands of people in this process, hundreds of thousands ideally, maybe millions, including Jews in the diaspora, and non-Jewish Israelis. There are Arabs and Druze and various other people, Christians living on that land, Muslims, who are stakeholders in the country's purpose because they're citizens and they have passports and driver's licenses and everything else is their country too. Right? And this is, in part, one of the goals of this is to heal a growing polarization and divide within Israeli society that's getting so bad it's actually threatening to tear the country apart at this point.
Well, I'm glad they have you as a resource. I'm also very glad you took the time to sit with me today. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about how to find you in the True Purpose Institute? Yeah,
so there's a website, truepurposeinstitute.com, which is really much more about individual purpose, and also for practitioners, consultants, therapists, coaches who wish to get trained to find their clients' purposes. You can find me at newparadigmgloballeader.com, New Paradigm Global Leader. And that's more for doing organizational purpose work, public speaking about purpose, and larger scale business, government, military, religion, bigger purposes of bigger things. So,
great. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you.